I am Jenny. I am the lead pastor here at Hope Church, and I really appreciate you all being here this morning. We are joined by Sonia and Sarah, who are doing a documentary about the bistro. We're not the bistro, but they have discovered, correct me if I'm wrong, but discovered this connection between this congregation and the bistro and asked if they could be here and film us as well. So welcome. Welcome from Paris. Um, gosh, what I literally have in my notes so I don't swear is gee whiz, which is something I never say. Gee whiz. It has been a heartbreaking year to be a progressive Christian, has it not? In 2013, Merge, our parent congregation, received a small grant allowing us to host a conference for young adults. And all of us in leadership had just read The Year of Biblical Womanhood by Rachel Held Evans. So we used that entire grant to pay for her costs to come to Bloomington Normal. It was one of those fall weekends that we get, it was kind of like this temperature, but our trees were perfect, like red and gold and all those fall colors. She arrived on a Friday afternoon, and we asked if she wanted to hang out in the hotel, and instead Rachel said, "No, I'm happy to come over to your house." So those of us on staff were on, at that time, went to my porch and opened bottles of wine, and she was at that time, she and her husband Dan were trying to get pregnant. It had not happened, and it would not happen for a couple of years. She was so vulnerable with us to share that part of her life, as she was for everyone, to share vulnerably who she was and what she was going through. She shared that with us and said, "Man, this Bloomington Normal is such a perfect community," because it really did look perfect that weekend. And just as she was saying that, a horse and carriage clip clopped past my porch. And she was like, "See, I told you." And we thought, yes, Rachel, it's always like this. You should definitely move to Bloomington Normal. We thought that her presentation the next day, which was at Illinois Wesleyan, which also looked gorgeous, was going to be about her year of biblical womanhood. But she told us at that time, it was now October of 2014, I'm doing some new research and some new writing, and I talked about that crazy year. And if you haven't read this book, she decided to prove nobody, I don't care what your church tagline is, nobody is following the Bible literally. And she proved this by ridiculously following the Bible literally, and it looked crazy. And her husband Dan went along with it, and she tried to do each month whatever the Bible said literally. And evangelicals around the country were like, "Finally, someone said it out loud. Someone said it out loud." And it wasn't just an argument. She did it in like this delightful way. And we thought she was going to talk about that. But she said, since doing that, I and many others don't fit in church anymore. We want church. We don't fit in church anymore. And she was doing her research for the book that became Searching for Sunday. And she presented that to us and with us. And if you know Hope's history, October of 2014, we were only 7 months old. We had booked her before we even had weekly worship. So we were like, yeah, we want to understand what people are looking for in church. And like her, we had done research and finding out what people who didn't go to church wanted. Now, I will say, I've said since then, if you find out what people who don't go to church want and then offer a church, it turns out it's still people who don't go to church. So it's actually amazing that we've grown a church. It's a miracle. And there have been many moments along the way that we thought, Oh, we made a mistake in our marketing and our marketing research. People who don't go to church don't go to church. It's really hard to build that way. But here you are. And you know, we kept up all the chairs that we brought out last week when we were packed because I want us all to see hey, there's space. There's space to invite others in the community. There is space for people who do not go to church for good reason um, to give this a try. And we're going to keep these out even in the summer, even when it's like July and we're like, oh, this is uncomfortable. No, we want to remind each other of the space that we have because it's a metaphor for that space that we have, right? And it's a metaphor for the space that God has at God's table for all people. So she told us that she was going to publish this book later called Searching for Sunday, um, and uh, and here's some of the things she said. She said, "I told them, referring to evangelical pastors, I told them we're tired of the culture wars, tired of Christianity getting entangled with party politics and power." Millennials want to be known what we're for, I said, not just what we're against. We don't want to choose. She said millennials because that's what she was speaking for, but we've learned this is true for Gen Zers, Gen Xers, baby boomers, and beyond as well. That's for you, Phil. Thank you. We're so honored to have more than one retired pastor here with us this morning. And Phil's wife, Rhonda, said, "You're going to have to keep me awake." So how did that work? It's been a long weekend. Millennials and others want to be known for what we're for, I said, not just what we're against. We don't want to choose between science and religion or between our intellectual integrity and our faith. Instead, we long for churches to be safe places to doubt, to ask questions, to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I haven't been able to read this without crying yet today. We'll see. She said, we want to talk about the tough stuff: biblical interpretation, religious pluralism, sexuality, racial reconciliation, and social justice, but without predetermined conclusions or simplistic answers. We want to bring our whole selves through the church doors without leaving our hearts and minds behind and without wearing a mask. She didn't say that in a sanctuary in Bloomington Normal. She said that on a national platform in a book that became a New York Times bestseller. She said what we were thinking and feeling and experiencing, and other people read it, and so many people read it and said, yes, yes, that's what we need. I cried because when we saw her again in 2016 at a conference, and I thought at that point she'd been on so many book tours, and I walked up to her, "Hi, Jenny." And I said, "Well, hi, I just wanted to tell you how happy I am to see you." And I was so excited when you got invited by President Obama to be on his faith commission. And she said, "Yeah, it was really cool. My oldest had just been born, and so I breastfed with President Obama right there." I thought, we've all met Michelle. We know he supports this. I just thought, oh, she's the coolest, while also being not coolio. Like she just said what we were thinking, and she said, as Brene Brown puts it, "I went to church thinking it would be like an epidural, that it would take the pain away. But church isn't like an epidural. It's like a midwife." I thought faith would say, "I'll take away the pain and discomfort." But what it ended up saying is, "I'll sit with you in it." That's what we've sought to promise here in a church that calls itself Hope. Hope doesn't mean fixed. Hope doesn't mean that there's not pain. In fact, hope is an real yet unrealized future. So hope, to be in a church called Hope, it acknowledges that life is messy and can be painful and it can be hard, but we can see a future time. In Searching for Sunday, she also said, the modern day church doesn't like to wander or wait. The modern day church likes results. And we all know of congregations we've seen here or elsewhere where you can brag about results. Leaders in churches convinced the gospel is a product we've got to sell to an increasingly shrinking market. We like our people to function as walking advertisements. Happy, put together, finished, proof that this Jesus stuff still works. At best, such a culture generates pews of Stepford wives style robots with painted smiles and programmed moves. We do not have pews. We don't have pews. And we don't have Stepford wives style robots here. At worst, it creates environments where abuse and corruption get covered up to protect reputations and preserve image. And certainly last year, the Me Too movement that went beyond to the hashtag #ChurchToo movement, we saw that to be true. The world is watching, Christians like to say, so let's be on our best behavior and quickly hide the mess. Let's throw up some before and after shots and roll that flashy footage of our miracle product blanching out every sign of dirt, hiding every sign of disease. This is how we feel. She put words to it. But if the world is watching, we might as well tell the truth. And the truth is, the church doesn't offer a cure. It does not offer a quick fix. The church offers death and resurrection. The church offers the messy, inconvenient, gut-wrenching, never-ending work of healing and reconciliation. The church offers grace. Anything else we try to peddle is snake oil. It's not the real thing. The church offers the messy, inconvenient, gut-wrenching, never-ending work of healing and resurrection. With a church like ours, one that's at least trying to do this, and there's no shortage of people who say to me in this community that a church like this should exist, or if they went to church, their church, and they'd show up, and they might even expect us to already be a fully formed community they're welcomed into. But here we are. What's crazy is the number of people who have started coming to Hope even in the last year. If you have been a part of Hope for longer than 1 year, raise your hand. Okay, so a few. Let's do it the other way so we can see also less than a year. Will you raise your hand? See, it's not. This morning, it's probably 25-75. Last week, it probably would have been 50-50. Sometimes it's more 60-40. Here's what that means. Those of you that just raised your hands, there are Sundays where you're in the majority and everyone's coming in waiting for someone else to be community, or you're maybe not waiting, but that's the way it normally works in church, right? There's already an established community, and then whoever's new gets welcomed in. Okay, here is our crazy, complicated, messy church community. And yes, we still believe that community and authentic community, being real, is important. We're barely already a community. So when we say a community learning to live Christ-centered lives, let's just look at that shortened form. A community learning. That's where we are. We're learning not only about ourselves and about our faith, we're learning how to be community. How are you supposed to be community? We're trying to do this in a different way. We're acknowledging that it's messy. We're not rolling out programs that will connect everyone. We're really trying to do this thing. And it's complicated. It's complicated. If you have been here, certainly, let's say, how many people have been here more than 4 years, 4 or more years? That gets pretty small, doesn't it? Yeah. Like, you all are the ones that are offering, that are that have the most accountability and responsibility to offer the radical hospitality, okay? No pressure whatsoever, but if you've been here more than 4 years, there's some pressure because you are the old timers. If you grew up in one of those 100-year-old churches where where it's like the super whatever people have been there generations, that's you. You're picture that person, that is you. We need to do this because it's important work to do. But here's what we want to talk about this week and for the next 4 weeks. We're going to do this for 5 weeks. We just want to acknowledge that building relationships has always been complicated, always. Building relationships in 2019 is more complicated than it has ever been. And there is quite a bit of research to show that that's true. We're thankful that when every single Sunday we pray that absolutely everyone experiences God's love, that a few someones show up. And when you pray weekly for absolutely everyone, you cannot be the kind of church that's like, okay, but we have enough people. We want to be deep, not wide. We're self-actualized, and we have enough people now. If we'd said that, how many people? 2019 is when you're new to this church. Like, there are many of you in this room who you had not been here until even this year. Had we decided at some point, we have enough, and now we need to go deep, we wouldn't have some of you in this room, and that would be so sad. We pray every week for absolutely everyone. And I want to say, building community is hard no matter who you are. If you're trying to be a progressive church, or more fun to say a big gay church, but we welcome straight people too. It doesn't matter if you're there, or if it's your State Farm team, even your college freshman dorm, that place where it was once the easiest to build community, it is hard and complicated in 2019. Relationships, dating, friends, family. Here's part of why. With all the modes of communication that we have and all of our constant connectedness, we have the illusion of companionship, constant connection, without the actual demands of friendship or relationships. Because community is made up of a bunch of relationships, and relationships are hard and messy, and they're not easy, and we bring our own personality and hurts and judgments, and everyone else brings their own personality and hurts and judgments, and then we add in all of the devices that make us feel like we're communicating all of the time. Now, before I get too far into this, please know, over the next 5 weeks, this is absolutely not going to be a phones are bad, put away your phones. This is not what this is. Technology is part of our life, and it's going to continue to be a part of our life. What we're going to talk about is, how do we create that kind of church and then the kind of lives that Rachel Held Evans was talking about, given the reality of our modes of communication. We're just going to accept those as reality and go from there. This series is called Alone Together because it can be so easy for us, more easy than it's ever been in human history, to have a group of people together, but everyone feel alone. And that's just simply not going to do, is it? If we're a community learning, let's dig into this, right? Let's lean into this. We want to see what the research says. We're going to start with MIT sociologist Sherry Turkle, Dr. Sherry Turkle. She did her initial work when she was getting her PhD at Harvard, so she's smart. And she worked, that's my level of intelligence. She's smart. And you know who one of her professors was? Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson, who taught us the life cycle, the ways in which people grow and mature in relationships. That was one of her professors. Back in 1996, Dr. Turkle thought that the internet and our phones were only going to serve as a tool to help us learn more about ourselves. She was excited about it. She ended up on the cover of Wired magazine because she thought it was only going to be a tool to help us know ourselves better so that we could be better in connection and relationship. Well, she could not have predicted, she writes, the ways we are at risk for interrupting those life cycles. Our devices didn't just change how we communicated, they started to change us. She says, I love technology and giving it up. I'm not a give it up proponent. It's here. We need to learn how to interact. One of her research projects was, and she interviewed hundreds of people who admitted to texting at funerals. Like they would go to a funeral and then be texting. And so she wanted to understand why. Like more than, hey, honey, don't forget to pick up the chicken or whatever from the grocery store. Like why are people texting? And as she got deeper into that research, what she discovered is at a funeral, you feel all the feelings. You feel it, right? In fact, that's the purpose of that ritual. That is actually helpful to us as humans as we move through grief. It's only one tiny part of it, but that's helpful, right? In our gut, and we cry our eyes out. It's purposeful. But if you can pull yourself up to a text about something mundane, then you don't feel it, which is fine. She didn't feel judgmental about that, more curious. Okay, why is that happening and what's happening? And she began to track that more and understood it was changing the way people were grieving and actually interrupting people's ability to begin the grieving process. She wasn't looking at this as a, you shouldn't text in a funeral, more like a, how is this affecting us, with a deep compassion for humans? What she discovered in researching all kinds of people is that we're always doing something else, and what would have be considered, unfathomable years ago happens just routinely now. And in a class or in a meeting, you would never in the past have also been shopping or talking to your friends or just scrolling Facebook because you're bored. You would have been in that meeting. And again, she's not just she's not a she's more like, okay, let's get curious about this. What's going on? And here's what she found out the risks of always communicating offer to us. And again, she was not saying this to those pesky teenagers. She was saying this as much or more to adults. And she said that in her research, it was kids actually saying, I wish my parent would get off the phone. She started to hear that children were having to fight for their parents' attention against a device. Oh, here are the risks, she said. We are at risk for losing the ability to relate to each other. We're at risk for losing the ability to engage in deep self-reflection, and that hinders our ability to relate to each other. You see the cycle we can end up in? We're already not relating deeply to each other. Then we don't invest the time needed to reflect on our own thoughts and feelings and reactions and responses. And then we're not as good at relating to each other. Okay, this is the reality. Now, I go back in my mind, it's my responsibility to try to build a community, learning to connect with each other in this context. Not only are all of you really new to this community, also, it's harder than ever to build relationships. And those